experience of bullying at some point in our lives, whether it was at school or at home even, or in our work environment. And we all know what that feels like. And I always try to talk to people about bullying a bit on a spectrum, because I think that's quite helpful, and that's also very helpful with children in trying to help you get an understanding of really where it falls on the spectrum. So if you think about bullying on a spectrum, it could start with something that's pretty harmless, probably wouldn't really fall into the category of bullying, but kind of just teasing, something that if you can learn to ignore it, it actually isn't so bad. But then it starts to become more intentional, and where the intention is actually to hurt you, whether it's to hurt you physically, or whether it's to undermine your work, or whether it's to somehow undermine you financially or discriminate, or whether it's to hurt you physically. Okay, so that would be on a more serious level. And then you also have to look at how persistent it is. Is it a once-off, or is it chronic? Is it ongoing? And so it helps you clarify what you're actually dealing with. And if one looks at the emotions evoked with bullying, it's a whole range. In children, it's a huge sense of helplessness and fear. I think even in adults, especially if it's somebody that's quite intimidating or in a position of authority, it's this great sense of helplessness. Anger, a sense of, this is not fair, why is this happening to me? Worry, a lot of people worry about it because they don't know where to go. They can't afford to find another job, or there aren't other jobs available. And sadness. Ongoing bullying, ongoing harassment, ongoing teasing can lead to something more serious. And I've treated adults and children who come to me because they have an anxiety disorder, or they've developed depression because it's been ongoing. And that's obviously more serious. So what would you do? Okay, you've got to ask yourself these questions. What is available to you if it's your child? What is the school's policy on bullying? And if it's in your company, what is your company's policy on bullying? And who is there to assist you in the situation? So, you get various types of bullying, but at the end of the day, bullying is any abuse of power. Any person abusing power against you. So at school, it could be a child that's slightly older or slightly bigger or more popular, rallying all the children against you. It could be a teacher. I know I personally have had many memories of teachers that said incredibly hurtful comments, and I think that when a teacher bullies a child, it's absolutely not acceptable, because that's a real abuse of power. So it can be verbal, it can be financial, it can be physical, and in our corporate, it can definitely be withholding promotions, discrimination, any form of trying to undermine a person's judgments, sidelining a person. That happens in the corporate, and it's not as visible. You know what I mean? It's not like it's something tangible. Often you just have a great sense that this is happening to you, but it's very hard to actually have a concrete case to take forward. So what is the profile of a bully? Okay, so you get the playground bully who's often unpopular, who doesn't necessarily have friends, and that child picks on other children from a place of insecurity. Also, children that bully often come from homes where they are being bullied, or where they are exposed to some kind of verbal or physical or emotional abuse. Poor impulse control, and that can be children and adults. A great sense of entitlement. I'm entitled to treat you this way because I feel a certain way. And then also, unfortunately, among the personality disorders, your narcissists are among the biggest bullies that you'll get. And they love corporate. You'll find that there was a researcher who did work on psychopath, sociopath, narcissistic behavior, and he said outside of the criminal population, his research samples he found in corporate. So that's pretty scary. And the difference is the criminals are called unsuccessful psychopaths, and the ones in corporate are called successful psychopaths. So they're not the ones who are going to go out and kill someone, but they certainly are the ones who are going to be your bullies in the corporate sector. And sadly, if you have a boss that is a narcissist, there's not a huge amount you can do. Really there isn't, because they are so resistant to change. But like I said, that's only a small part of the population. For the rest of us, for the general population, usually there are means and ways to actually resolve the problem and find ways to move forward. Right, so what do we do about bullies in our workplace? If there's a physical threat, or if there's actually physical harm reported, nobody, no one, and no child and no adult should ever be subject to that. And you can report it. I think you should report it directly to your boss, to HR, and if necessary to the police, because that kind of behavior is just simply not acceptable. If it's not physical, it's more emotional, verbal, corporate type bullying, speak to a trusted mentor or confidant. Don't go and speak to every Tom, Dick, and Harry in your office. The reason that you don't do that is you discredit yourself. You know what I mean? You want to get perspective first of all. You need to speak to somebody you trust. So you need to say, this is what's happening. Give me your perspective. Somebody who's maybe more senior or older, more experienced can be very helpful in giving you some insight on how they've dealt with it and give you a bit of clarity and perspective. Go to your HR and find out what is the policy. You don't have to disclose anything at that stage. Just find out what is the policy on bullying, how do you handle it if it's your colleague, if it's your subordinates, if it's your boss, and if it's a client. Because you'd be amazed how people in client services are bullied by clients, demanding clients. Keep a very detailed account of your work activities. You, for yourself, need to know what you're doing. Because when you're bullied or you're undermined or you're kind of emotionally abused or bullied, you start to lose faith in your own abilities. You start to doubt yourself. You start to question your own value in the company. So if you detail what you do and you have a clear idea of what your job entails and you record everything, it's more visible to your boss and your colleagues, but mostly to you. So that if you do go to HR, you can say, but this is what I do. And I don't see why I should be sidelined, or I don't know why I should take this abuse from my boss when I'm doing exactly what my job asks of me. So it's very good to do that. It's also good to keep a detailed account of what the bullying is and what some of the, keep emails, or if they've said something, write it down verbatim, because you need to build a case. So if it's appropriate and you feel comfortable, there's no harm in you actually confronting the bully and just saying, I don't like this behavior. Is there a problem? Can we sort it out? Is it something I've done? Are you not happy with my work? Try to clarify and get to the bottom of it with the person, but not screaming and shouting. You've got to be professional at all times. You've got to try and keep your cool and don't resort to their tactics. That's so important. Don't let them make you the lesser person, because that's what their aim is. Just remember that. And as I said, they often don't have insight. So try to always be professional, document inappropriate behavior, copy HR in on any correspondence. Don't give the bully anything that they can use against you. Continue to do your job to the best of your ability. Your own actions will speak louder than words. And if necessary, seek legal assistance. So I had a client, patient who came to see me, who her boss, her direct boss, was actually sexually harassing her. Quite subtle, but I mean it was there. It was pretty evident. And he was very senior in the company, very senior. So she went to HR and she disclosed. And HR then actually disclosed to her that somebody else had also come forward from Johannesburg. She worked in Cape Town. And so they built a case around this, but they had to then get legal advice. And what was so interesting was the way the company handled it. They didn't want bad publicity. This was a very senior member. So they basically asked him to resign. Please resign and go quietly, which he did. So there was resolution in that the perpetrator, the bully, was asked to leave. But I think it left my client with a huge sense of dissatisfaction because he basically got away with it, and he was able to then go into another company and probably do the same. And sometimes that's the reality. But she did what she could in terms of protecting herself, and in terms of she didn't have to be the one who left at the end of the day. So we had to reframe it as well for her to see that it took a huge amount of courage taking on such a senior member in her company. But, you know, that sometimes is what is necessary to speak out. So try and develop your own resources. If you or your child is being bullied, try to develop resources. Your HR or your wellness program. Your wellness program, the advantage of that is you can be completely confidential, and everything you discuss with the therapist or psychologist assigned to you is confidential. And it's up to you when you want to disclose. But they can walk part of the journey with you and help you also look at what resources are available to you and help you in the decision-making process. And then friends and family outside of work, to speak to them. Trusted colleagues, people that you trust. And then assertiveness training for yourself and taking a proactive approach. So with our children, I think it's some very important tools, and I've printed some handouts for you. And I think as with ourselves, it's so important not to blame ourselves. It's not our fault if somebody out there decides to pick on us for whatever reason. And it's not our child's fault if they're getting picked on. But children are embarrassed, they're ashamed. There's something wrong with me, why am I getting picked on? So I always say to people, do not minimize what it is like for your child or someone, a friend of yours who comes to you, or your husband, or somebody who works for you, or a colleague. Don't minimize it. Do not say, it's not such a big deal, get over it, or don't say ignore it. Because for that person, it's a real problem, and you need to work with that person around how we're going to manage it. So that's why I find when somebody comes and tells me, I always take out the spectrum and I draw a line and I say, okay, let's give me an idea of where we're at. So, you know, it might start with sort of being picked on, and then it might feel like it's progressing towards insults or character attacks. And that's definitely more emotional abuse. And then it might progress to being undermined or harassment. And then physical. So you have to gauge on the spectrum, you know, how bad it is. And also just remember with children, like, the more sensitive children tend to catastrophize things. You know, I had a little girl, and she was coming to me for various things, but she always used to say, the children are rude to me, and I don't want to go to school. I'd say, what? Tell me what it is. And she said, my surname is Miller, and they call me Caterpillar. And I hate it. And I wish they'd stop picking on me. And this little, she was about 7, and she was very sweet, but this really upset her. And it wasn't going to help for me to say, pretty ridiculous, you know. I had to help her understand that there's a difference between children who are intentionally going out to hurt you and between children who are just being silly, children who just want to get a good laugh. And when we actually unpacked it, I said, well, what do other children call other kids? I know this one is so-and-so, Butterworth is peanut butter, and this one is that, and this one wears glasses, so she gets called that. So I try to kind of contextualize it for her, but not minimize it. To say, I know it's bad for you, but let's look at how many Millers there are in the phone book. Do you think they all got called Caterpillar, and how do you think they coped with it? So it's a nice way to help someone almost build a little bit of a thicker skin. there are adults who also tend to be more sensitive. So they'll say, oh, someone looked at me funny today. And I know they were talking about me in the tea room. I just felt it when I walked in there. I don't know if you've experienced people who are like, they're highly sensitive. And sometimes you think they're really imagining it. And they may very well be. So then I say to them, well, if that's the case, and if that's how you feel, what can you do about it? Can you say something, or is it better to maybe just look at the friends that you do have, that you do tend to sit with? Does it really matter what they're gossiping about in the tea room? Is that why you come to work? So we try to look at problem solving within the individual. Self-esteem building is huge, so important, with children and adults. Because at the end of the day, what bullying really does is it breaks down our confidence. It breaks down our own sense of self-value. It breaks down our own perspective about ourselves. So whether you're a child or whether you're an adult, I always say take something outside of work and find something you're good at. Even if you find that you spending time with friends makes you feel better about yourself, try to do more of that. But also try to find a skill, something that you enjoy. So for children, it's so important if you can find something they're good at. Anything. It can be sport, if not sport, it could be judo, it could be art, whatever. Try to look at what are the things outside of school that my child is good at that can build their self-esteem so that they're more immune to bullies. Because bullies generally pick on people that, in their opinion, are more vulnerable. They don't generally pick on their people that they don't see as a threat. And also, they pick on children usually who look different. Children who might be physically smaller or bigger or wear glasses or any defining feature. So if that is the case with your child, look at what can I do about that? How can I try to build my child's self-esteem? And social skills groups are very nice for that, for children. So any group activities, really. But even as adults, social skills. Join a business networking group, or go and do Toastmasters if you do presentations and you need to develop your skills there and your confidence there. Or there are lots of different activities. A theatre group, if that's what you enjoy, if you need to make some friends going to the theatre. Or wine tasting. But really developing those social skills for yourself makes you more immune to these kinds of emotional attacks and these bullying tactics. If we're looking more along the corporate sector here, and it's interfering with your ability to do your job, you're starting to find that you actually can't focus, you can't get your job done, it's really interfering with your ability to do your job, that's at the point that I would suggest you go and get some professional help. Go and contact someone in the wellness program, a qualified psychologist that you can see. Adam, how many sessions are people entitled to? So 4 sessions, you can really get through quite a lot of stuff. Again, that person is trained to give you some guidance in terms of the best thing to do. A lot of people come to me very desperate. And even after 3 sessions, we've got a plan. What are we going to do? How are we going to be proactive about it? And only after that process do they then decide whether they're going to stay in the job or whether they actually want to change the department or actually leave their job. But usually facilitation is also very helpful. So let's say you've got a colleague that's picking on you. You've confronted them and the behavior hasn't stopped. You're tired of being harassed, you're tired of feeling undermined. You've been to HR and you've been to the wellness program and you decide, no, something's got to be done. And you go directly to your boss. Don't talk to other colleagues. Go to your boss and say, this is becoming a problem. This is an account of what's been happening. Can you facilitate a meeting between the 3 of us so we can try to resolve the problem? Because facilitation gives both parties an opportunity to kind of talk it out, but with a third person. And if your boss isn't comfortable being a facilitator, then they need to find someone in the company who is, or they can outsource. They can get somebody else in who can facilitate that. And that often has very good results. The problem comes in if it is your boss. And I would like someone, if there is somebody here who could maybe share an experience that they may have had previously, or they know of someone who's had that problem where their boss was the bully. I don't know if anyone wants to share an experience with the group, or they know of anybody. No one? Okay, that's fine. I had a client who also had a boss who was black and white. One day super friendly, the next day tantrums, but would swear, which is just not acceptable. That's full-on verbal abuse. Demand things, unpredictable, inconsistent, and it really affected the whole group. It wasn't just that individual, the whole group. But what happened with this group of people is they almost had a collective negativity. It was like, well, he's our boss. Like, what are we going to do about it? HR can't get through to him. He owns the company. Where do we go from here? We tried everything. And for the person that was seeing me, it actually got to a point where she said, I can't be a part of this. The negativity in this company is just bringing me down. I've tried everything I possibly can, and she decided to leave the company. And honestly, in a case like that, where you've tried everything, sometimes that's the very next thing you have to do. Because why should you stay in an abusive environment? And ultimately, she felt bad leaving because everybody else was left behind, but we adults. We're not children stuck in a situation where we're helpless. And I think that's what we have to remember. We actually are not helpless. But sometimes when the bully is our direct boss and they are not changing their behavior and we're subject to that every single day, it's just not worth it. It really isn't. And I don't see it as a weakness to say, I'm not putting up with this. It takes a lot of courage. But that was the very best thing she did. And I mean, it was amazing because this person who had been seeing me for months, literally, after she left, she was a different person. You could just see, like, the weight was off her shoulders. So that is sometimes something you simply have to do. So when you deal with bullies, remain professional and calm. Assert yourself if appropriate. Do not respond to threats or intimidation. Report this immediately. As I said, document everything. Remain focused on your own abilities and your own self-worth. Don't spread office gossip and rather speak to somebody you trust. Build your own inner resilience through personal growth and activities outside of work. So I have had clients who have come to see me who can't leave their job. They look for other work, there isn't anything available, they need the money, they have to support their families, and then we say, okay, keep looking, don't stop, keep sending out your CV, but until you find something else, how are you going to cope? You've got to get through your working day. So what have you got outside of work to look forward to? What have you got? How can you manage? And in those cases, relaxation activities are helpful, learning to set boundaries, like, my boss might have a tantrum if I leave at 5, but actually in my job description it says I work till 5 and I get my work done. So you almost develop a thicker skin and say, you have to bounce off me. You simply have to take that approach. And I've also had people who work in, I don't know what it's like in this company, but in finance, and it's just expected that you stay till 7 o'clock. If you leave at 5, everybody looks at you. Even though in your job description, your job hours, your work hours are set, and you've done your work. And also with those people, it takes a lot of work to be able to develop those boundaries and say, if you choose to stay till 7, I respect that, but I'm leaving at 5:30 because I have a family and I have other commitments. And once they learn how to make that distinction, people actually stop giving them a hard time because they just don't take their nonsense. That's the bottom line. But again, if it's your boss and you're being subject to a lot of harassment, that's different. Right, so as I said, you've tried everything, nothing's working. Can you change direction? Is there possibility of transferring to a different department? Revise your CV, look elsewhere, reframe this as, how am I going to change my situation. Maybe there's something better for me out there. I've been in this job for so long, I actually need a change. If all else fails, do not stay in an abusive relationship or hostile environment. Stay empowered, take control back. This is also helpful for children, teaching your children how to develop self-awareness. So teaching your children about what are you doing, do you think, that's actually making the bully carry on. What do you do when the bully picks on you? No, I start crying, or I go into a little ball, or the kids all stand around and laugh at me, and the bully looks like a big, popular person. Then we say, okay, what can you do differently? First of all, where is it happening? Is it happening in class? Is it happening in the playground? Where can you go in the playground if the bully's there? What can you do? Can you go and sit in the library? Can you find an activity to do during break time so that the bully cannot pick on you? Where are your friends? Can you rather just avoid the bully and go to your friends? You can also teach your children to be assertive, but if there's a physical threat, never ever encourage them to hit back. Because remember, bullies are usually bigger and they're stronger, and they can really do some damage. But at the same time, enroll your children in self-defense classes or judo or karate, because that just gives them a sense that they can protect themselves if they have to. But there's a big difference between the physical and the emotional bullying. Obviously, if you feel that your child is at risk in any way physically, then you have to act immediately. You should act anyway. And I'll speak a little bit after this about how to handle it in a school environment specifically. So look at yourself in the way you treat others. If you're a boss or a colleague or a client, think about your own behaviors. Think about what you role model to your children. Are you creating bullies at home? Are you a bully? If necessary, and you feel that you need to develop or create better impulse control for yourself, take anger management classes or assertiveness training. There are all sorts of amazing classes and training that you can do. But the bottom line is do something. Don't just sit around and do nothing. So in a school environment, what you want to do again is reassure your children that you are going to act in their best interest. And if they say, please don't tell, you have to explain to them that you need to protect them. That's your job. And if you don't say anything, then the bullying is going to carry on. But you can reassure them that you will just tell the teacher, that you're not going to go and tell everybody else. And you can also tell that teacher that your child is very afraid and fearful. So it must be treated with confidentiality. There's no need for everybody else to know about this. In your meeting with the teacher, don't have any other students present. Just you and the teacher, and if possible, the principal. But no other students. They don't need to know what's going on. I had a mom who was not very politically correct, and her little 6-year-old was being bullied, and she stormed onto the playground. She went to fetch her kids. And she went up to this little kid and said, if you touch my child, I know exactly where you live. I will find you and I will hurt you. And this mom felt quite proud of herself. But the literature all says don't do that. Although I think our parental instinct is that we want to do that. Trust me, if it was me, I would want to do that. But it often backfires. So try to control yourselves and go the route of firstly, get in touch with the teacher. Find out what is the school doing about it. Tell them what exactly is happening. What, on this spectrum, where is it? What is happening to your child? Who is the bully? And try to be calm and patient and collaborative with the teacher. Sometimes if you're angry, you go in there and you're quite demanding, and it doesn't help. So sit down with the teacher and the principal. I would probably get the principal as well, because I want to know what is the school's bigger policy on bullying. And find out, what are we going to do about the situation? How are we going to protect this child? Who is available to supervise these kids during break time, because that's usually when the bullying happens. Not in the classroom, outside the classroom. When can my child be in the school that they are safe? Because I have to tell my child to go back tomorrow to school, and I know there's a bully there. So if you elicit the teacher's cooperation and ask for daily feedback, that usually makes them more accountable to you. And then what the school usually does is they would firstly they would start to be more vigilant and look out for what's happening and try to put a stop to it. A lot of schools will actually have a session with the children around bullying, but if it doesn't stop, they would then get the bully's parents in and say, okay, these are the consequences. This is what's going to happen if your child does not stop. And this is our policy on bullying, and we don't tolerate it. So the school, but it does take time. And, you know, it's difficult to encourage your child to go back to school when, you know, they're being bullied. But the problem is, if they stop going to school, then what? It's really hard to get them to go back to school. But if your child is in any physical danger, then it's up to you to protect your child. So if there's any kind of physical harm to them, and it wasn't accidental, it wasn't a child that just bumped them, it was intentional harm, then you need to act very quickly. And if you feel as a parent that you need to keep your child at home until something's been done, then that's your decision to make. Because it is ultimately about protecting your child. But if it's not on that level, and it's more sort of on the emotional side and the verbal side, the character attacks, then it's just really about working with your child, empowering your child, but also working with the system. And I also find with children it helps when I tell them about my own experiences. And tell them, you know, it happened to me as well, and what do you think we can do about it? Try to problem solve with your kids. Ask them what they think they can do about it. Because if they come up with a solution, then they also feel better about the situation. But telling them to get a thicker skin or fight back or get over it is not helpful in any way. It's just minimizing and telling that child, I'm not available to you. Make more time for your children when you do think they're vulnerable, when they are even if they're just being picked on. It's not like anything serious. It's going to upset them. Make more time available for them. And as I said, try to work on building their self-confidence. And it really starts at home, with children for the most part. It really does. You know, you want to prevent your child from being a victim, but you also want to prevent your child from being a bully. So at this stage, I'd like to see if there are any questions or anybody would like to know anything more about school children being bullied or adults being bullied. Some feedback from the audience. I think there are people that have obviously come here today because they are or experiencing it or they know of someone, so please feel free to ask questions. Everybody's very shy today. Yes.
What if you can clearly see your colleague being bullied?
Yes.
But obviously you said you must record all activity.
Okay.
Obviously I've not recorded any.
Yes, because it's happening to someone, you are witnessing it, so you're the bystander.
So what do you do in that case?
Great, thank you for bringing that up, because that's something that is quite common. So with bullying, you get the bully, the victim, and the bystander. And in schools, what you get so much of is people think it's just about these two. I'm not being bullied and I'm not the bully, so I'm just going to, it doesn't affect me. But the bystanders are the ones that are witness to so much of what's going on. And that can be in school, but it can also be in corporate. So encourage your children. What we do when we do talks at schools is we say, if you're a bystander and you're not doing anything, you're just as bad as the bully, because you are actually allowing him to get away with it. And the bystanders are a lot more collectively than just the one or two bullies. So we try to educate children about telling. Tell an adult. Tell when you see that somebody else is being victimized. So in a corporate environment, I think the best thing would be to go to the person that you think is being your colleague and tell them, listen, I am seeing something that I'm not uncomfortable with, and I really feel for you. And try to get them talking about it and say, you know, maybe you can offer your own opinion and say, I don't think you should stand for it. So I've been to this talk, and this is what I learned at the talk, and I wonder if you would like to maybe try some of these things. So I would really just offer a lot of support, but let them know that you're not comfortable watching this and you want to help them. How does that sound? Is it somebody you would be comfortable to speak to?
So it should always be a direct approach to the person, to the victim, as we say, not to somebody else in a senior position or HR.
Well, I would first go to the person to find out what their thoughts are about it. But if you're not comfortable doing that, you can go to HR and say, I think this is what's going on. Will you investigate further? But then you have to say, this is what I'm seeing. You know what I mean? So it depends on your relationship with your colleague. If it's someone that you feel comfortable, but if you're seeing a dynamic where a person tends to be the bully and you want to maybe report on the bullying behavior, then I would go to HR. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I would go to HR and get more information from them as to how they think you should handle it. But I think your question is very important because it raises the thing of doing something. Because ultimately, it might not be you this time, but it could be you the next time. And we should all have a policy within ourselves and within our environments, if it's at home or if it's at work, that we don't stand for it because it's abuse. It's an abuse of power and it's not okay. It's just simply not okay. And also there's a perception that bullying happens more among the male population, and that's absolute rubbish. Unfortunately, women and girls in schools are the worst. Girls being bullied at schools, it is rife. Teenage girls, the way they gossip and the hurtful things they can say, I can imagine in a corporation it must be just as bad. So don't make the mistake of thinking that it's a gender thing, because it isn't. It really isn't. It can happen across both genders, races, age groups. Anyone else? Yes.
I wonder if you can maybe assist. I don't know if this is bullying, but I don't deal directly with clients face to face or over the telephone, but I do tend to find that you get quite a few abusive clients calling in, and when you answer the call, it's not always that you in a positive mood, and all of a sudden you jumped on negatively and you've been, I would say, basically abusive. This client has been probably abusive towards you. How do you, how can you protect yourself as well as the company by not
reacting to them?
Yes.
Is it like in a call center?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so the person's on the other side of the phone and they're not seeing you face to face, and they think they can just take all out on you because you're just the voice, but they're actually venting their frustration about something that generally is not even within your control. That's the bottom line. I think call center staff probably get the worst of it. I think they get the brunt of people's frustrations. It's terrible, and I really do feel for you. And I think when you're in that type of position, you already have to go to work and put on your suit of armor and say, you know what? That's just another voice on the other end of the phone. Yes, it is a client, and it's important to take their concerns seriously, but I'm not going to be spoken to a certain way. And I will very politely tell them that this is how we manage their grievance, and you almost become like a broken record. So when they're shouting and yelling and da-da-da, you just say, I'm really sorry to hear that you feel that way. This is what you can do about it, or this is who I can refer you to. But you actually detach yourself. You actually, when you step into that job, into that role, you actually have to emotionally detach yourself, because they don't have your best interest at heart. and you're trying to do your job to the very best of your ability. And that means you deal with grievances and you give information and you try to refer them to who can help them. And that's you being professional. But you don't have to fix their problems. That's not your job, is it? But what if the problem's bigger than you?
Basically, what we do is, it's first of all resolution, so you need to try to resolve.
Okay, you try to resolve the problem, and that's your job. But if they're not happy with what you're doing and it's not quick enough for them, then you also have to say, you know, I can only do so much. And if they have a grievance with the company, then they need to take that up with the company. So you remain professional, but you have to emotionally detach it. Detaching doesn't mean you don't care, but it does mean that you don't personalize what they're saying. It's displaced anger. They're taking out all their anger on you, and that's very common in bullying. People will do that, and often those in public service get it. I mean, poor waitresses. Can you imagine? I think it must be the worst. I was a waitress, but maybe that's where my training has come in handy. But really, it's about that suit of armor. I mean, I also, when I was first practicing, I worked with quite difficult personalities. And I would get a client phoning and saying, I need a report tomorrow, and you assess my child, and I've got to go to the lawyer, and I've got a meeting with the principal at 3 o'clock, and it's now 10 o'clock, I need it urgently. And you better drop everything you're doing and give it to me, otherwise I'm not paying you. Or, you know, they try to imply that you're not doing your job. And in the beginning, I would drop everything I was doing. I would try to get this report done because it was about my reputation, and I wanted to be a good enough psychologist and not thought of badly. And obviously with training and with years of experience, you start to realize that some people just have pathology. They just do. It's their stuff. And it's unreasonable for somebody to ask that of me. And they are going to be angry with me, but I can't take that on board. I have to be reasonable and say, this is what I can do, and this is what I can't. So I can get the report to you, but it's going to take me 3 days or 4 days. And if you have a meeting with the principal, I can speak to them. They are welcome to phone me, but I can't have a report ready for you in 2 hours. And they might be quite abusive, and some of them are. And especially with some clients, before I even phone them back, I have to put on my suit of armor and say, how am I going to handle this person, keep them at a bit of a distance, because they can be very confrontational, should I say, over the phone. So yes. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Or also a nice way, my one colleague says, you just kind of put this white light around you, or your safe color. Surround yourself with that color. When you go and you sit at your office cubicle, you say, right, they're not coming into my space. This is a work, this is an occupational hazard. It's part of the job, but when I leave work, that stays here. Very important to separate that. But yes, clients can be very demanding, very. So that's where your boundaries come in. And if you've got a supportive boss, you can also speak to them or your colleagues, who I'm sure experience the same. So you can form a support group in your call center. That's very helpful. Yes, that is helpful. Anyone else? Any other comments or questions? Yes.
How would you know where the line lies between being assertive and being a bully?
Generally, being assertive, you're still professional and you're polite. But when you go into bullying, you start shouting. So you're speaking at a level that's intimidating, and you are criticizing the person and not the behavior. So if you are unhappy with, or you're giving feedback to someone and you say, you know, coming late for work is just not acceptable and it's not okay. You're talking about the behavior, but you're talking in an even tone and you're specific about what it is that you don't like. And that's fine. But if you say, I can't trust you because you're always late and you're so unreliable, and that's a character attack. And that can be seen as abusive. And also it's your tone of voice. The other thing is when you speak badly about that person and that person's behavior. So you're talking about that person without respect to other colleagues. That's also abusive. So always speak directly to the person and address the specific behavior. And that is very helpful in your relationships. Because how many of us get angry with our partners and start saying, you never do the housework, I can't trust you with anything, you're pathetic, da-da-da-da-da, and with like your husband or your wife standing there. Rather say as calmly as you can, please will you put your cups back in the sink when I ask you to, because I have asked you that repeatedly and I feel like you're not listening to me. But you're speaking about the behavior specifically. I know we all do it. I'm guilty as charged, but we have to try to separate the behavior from the character, and we also have to try to look at, are we aggressive, are we threatening, are we shouting, are we raising our voice? So does that help? Does that answer your question?
Yes.
And sometimes it's a fine line, but you know when you're being a bully.
Yeah, but you know, if you've tried all that, you know, I think it's easy
and
to
it's falling
slide
on
into
deaf ears.
bullying.
We
If
all
you
get
repeat
frustrated.
The polite question and the
I
polite
know.
request. I think maybe we are bully sensitized.
Very possibly. Very possibly. I mean, if you look at some people, you know, they just don't seem to get the message. And you feel like you've got to escalate the message in order to get it through to them. But then you have to look at the consequences and say, if the late behavior doesn't stop, then this is the consequence. And you have to implement the consequence.
For me, it's specifically a teenager is
Oh, if it's a
hard
teenager.
to communicate with, and I
For
don't
teenagers,
want to be a bully,
okay. No, you should have just said that. Teenagers are a whole different story. Teenagers don't understand language. They understand consequences. So you have to say, I have asked you about this behavior and I feel like you're not listening, so I have to take away your cell phone for the day, or your iPad, or your TV. They only understand consequences. So yes, shouting at them and losing your temper, it's very normal. It really is normal. And you're not a bully, you're a frustrated parent. Okay, but they are definitely sensitized to that, and they can bring out the worst in us. So then try to find something that, an action of yours, a consequence that they actually listen to. And good luck. How old are they?
16.
Okay, so only 4 more years to go.
Thank you so much.
Hang in there. And you might have to contact the wellness program for your own support, because it is very trying. I know. Okay, I think that seems to be everyone. Anyone else? Questions? Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Let me just give out the handout for keeping your kids bully-free. And just hand this back. And then, if you have any questions or you need more information, maybe just get hold of Adam and he can pass on my details. You're welcome to email me. Okay.
Thanks, Dianne. Thanks very much.
That was a pleasure. Thank you very much.